Witam na Ryzykach i Trendach. Dziś będziemy rozmawiać o gospodarce. Zapytam wicepremiera Jarosława Gowina, prezesa Orange Polska Juliena Ducarroza i prezesa Ingka Group Jespera Brodina o ich plany na odbudowę. W pierwszej części będę rozmawiał z Jarosławem Gowinem o trudnej współpracy w ramach Zjednoczonej Prawicy, o Polskim Nowym Ładzie i o nowej polityce przemysłowej Polski. W drugiej części zapytam Juliena Ducarroza, jak plany polskiego rządu wpisują się w strategię Orange Polska, jak COVID zmienił i zmienia zarządzanie dużymi firmami. Wreszcie w trzeciej rozmowie będę próbował dowiedzieć się od Jespera Brodina, jak 20 rok wpłynął na plany i strategię IKEA, czy zwinność i zmienność jest zdrowa dla dużych organizacji, jak można przygotować się na przyszłe kryzysy, w tym na skutki katastrofy klimatycznej. Zapraszam na rozmowę. Panie premierze, bardzo dziękuję za przyjęcie zaproszenia i do przyjścia do nas na konferencję Ryzyka i Trendy. Chciałem zacząć od pytania pewnie najtrudniejszego, ale chciałem zapytać o to, jak łączy Pan obecnie obowiązki ministra rozwoju z zarządzaniem partią.
Przede wszystkim dziękuję bardzo za zaproszenie na to spotkanie. Witam Państwa. Doskonale łączę. Ministerstwem zajmuję się od godziny 8 rano do 22, a od 22 do 24 zajmuję się partią. Bardzo łatwe do pogodzenia.
Jasne. Chciałem się Pana zapytać o Polski Nowy Ład, nad którym rząd obecnie pracuje. Rozumiem, że ten program staje się powoli programem PiS-u zarazem, więc jest w jakimś takim przejściu z programu rządowego do programu partyjnego. I chciałem się zapytać, jak to współgra z Pana planem, czyli z nową polityką przemysłową Polski, na ile te plany są zbieżne, na ile one z siebie czerpią, a na ile jakoś tam jednak się rozjeżdżają?
Po pierwsze, nie jest jeszcze przesądzone, czy Nowy Ład będzie dokumentem całej koalicji rządowej, czy też dokumentem przedstawionym przez główną partię naszego obozu, więc Prawo i Sprawiedliwość. Natomiast mogę powiedzieć tyle, że eksperci porozumienia zostali zaproszeni do współpracy przy tworzeniu Nowego Ładu. Dajemy tam swój wkład. Mam na myśli na przykład projekt ustabilizowania tego, co nazywa się Funduszem Inwestycji Lokalnych, wspólnie z organizacjami samorządowymi, nie tylko Związkiem Miast Polskich, ale wszystkimi pozostałymi także. Przygotowaliśmy konkretny projekt ustawy, czyli coś w rodzaju takiej stałej subwencji rozwojowej, inwestycyjnej dla samorządów. Naszym wkładem jest to, co w Nowym Ładzie ma być powiedziane o mieszkalnictwie. Także wspomniana przez Pana nowa polityka przemysłowa, mam nadzieję, że stanie się elementem Nowego Ładu. Może się jednak okazać, że będą na tyle istotne rozbieżności w innych obszarach, że jednak będzie to dokument firmowany tylko przez jedną partię, a nie przez wszystkie trzy. Przy czym te rozbieżności chyba są poważniejsze między naszymi partnerami, czy między PiS-em a Solidarną Polską. Mam na myśli zwłaszcza kwestie związane z energetyką i polityką klimatyczną.
No właśnie chciałem się zapytać, na ile Pana wizja gospodarki, a wizja gospodarki też partnerów, i mówię tutaj z jednej strony o PiS-ie, z drugiej strony o Mateuszu Morawieckim, a z trzeciej strony o Solidarnej, są zbieżne, a na ile są rozbieżne. To znaczy, no jak to jest być ministrem gospodarki w rządzie byłego ministra gospodarki, pana premiera Mateusza Morawieckiego?
Oczywiście są bardzo poważne rozbieżności. Tak naprawdę to są rozbieżności między moim sposobem myślenia o gospodarce, a sposobem myślenia prawie całej obecnej klasy politycznej. Bo jak patrzę na program, jeżeli to można w ogóle nazwać programem, na pewne postulaty gospodarcze, chociażby Platformy Obywatelskiej, to mam wrażenie, że polska klasa polityczna przesuwa się w kierunku etatyzmu, interwencjonizmu państwowego. Ja jestem mastodontem. Ja wierzę w wolny rynek, ja wierzę w te idee Adama Smitha i Friedricha von Hayeka. Uważam, że im więcej spontaniczności w gospodarce, im niższe podatki, im mniejszy interwencjonizm państwowy, tym w dłuższej perspektywie lepiej dla obywateli, lepiej dla poziomu życia. Oczywiście znajdujemy się w szczególnej fazie, znaczy w czasach pandemii i jeszcze przez jakiś czas w czasach postpandemicznych interwencjonizm państwowy będzie niezbędny, ale ja to traktuję jako stan przejściowy, a nie jako pożądane optimum.
To bardzo chętnie porozmawiam właśnie o tej wizji, ale jeszcze zanim dopytałbym o sam plan nowej polityki przemysłowej Polski. Z tego co rozumiem, konsultacje odbyły się w styczniu. Teraz ma być do końca lutego, tak znalazłem na pana stronie, na państwa stronie. Ta biała księga powinna być gotowa z końcem lutego, a potem ten program powinien teoretycznie wchodzić w życie.
O nie, to jest bardziej skomplikowane. W styczniu zwróciliśmy się do środowisk biznesowych, zarówno do indywidualnych przedsiębiorców, jak i do organizacji biznesowych, o to, żeby przedstawiły swoje propozycje. I jeżeli chodzi o usuwanie barier utrudniających rozwój przemysłu, i jeżeli chodzi o jakieś perspektywy rozwojowe. To drugie jest bardzo ciekawe, dlatego że ja uważam, że wyłania się całkiem nowy świat, całkiem nowa mentalność klientów, jest świadomość konieczności skrócenia łańcucha dostaw. Niedawno byłem w Niemczech, tam bardzo dużo się dyskutuje o tak zwanej autonomii i suwerenności gospodarczej Europy. Mówiąc krótko, chociaż dzisiaj polska gospodarka jest w stanie recesji, a gospodarka krajów nas otaczających jest w dużo głębszym kryzysie, to równocześnie pandemia otwiera pewne perspektywy szybszego wzrostu, nowe szanse dla polskiej gospodarki. Tylko trzeba precyzyjnie zdefiniować, gdzie mamy przewagi konkurencyjne. Temu służy między innymi ta diagnoza stanu polskiej gospodarki, którą przeprowadzamy w ramach prac nad nową polityką przemysłową. Po zdiagnozowaniu tych przewag konkurencyjnych trzeba dobrać w dialogu z przedsiębiorcami, bo to nie jest tak, że jakiś minister czy jakiś urzędnik, z całym szacunkiem dla moich znakomitych współpracowników w ministerstwie, że my wiemy lepiej niż przedsiębiorcy. Nie, skoro ja jestem zwolennikiem spontanicznego ładu w gospodarce i wolnego rynku, to znaczy, że ufam przedsiębiorcom. I to w ich głosy chcemy się przede wszystkim wsłuchiwać po to, żeby w drugim etapie zbudować instrumenty, konkretne instrumenty wspierania tych branż, które są najbardziej produktywne, a przede wszystkim które są najbardziej proeksportowe. Dlatego, że będziemy rozwijać polską gospodarkę tym szybciej, im więcej będziemy eksportować.
A jaka jest pana intuicja, jakie są albo będą te przewagi konkurencyjne polskiego przemysłu na tym etapie rozmów i
Nie chciałbym przesądzać. Wszyscy znakomicie wiemy, że bardzo dużo nam brakuje do nawet średniej unijnej, jeżeli chodzi o takie kwestie kluczowe bardzo, jak innowacyjność. Przy ogromnych osiągnięciach rządu i przedsiębiorców w poprzedniej kadencji, bo sam przygotowywałem 2 ustawy o innowacyjności, budowałem pomost między nauką a gospodarką, nakłady na B+R w roku 2019, bo na razie są dane za 2019, wzrosły w tempie rekordowym w skali Unii Europejskiej, ale to jest ciągle początek drogi. Mamy silne, tradycyjne branże, ale tradycyjne to nie znaczy, że one muszą być nienowoczesne, nieinnowacyjne. Duża część mojego wysiłku w ramach pracy nad nową polityką przemysłową będzie polegała na tym, żeby dać impuls do uzyskania większej innowacyjności przez te branże, które są często tradycyjne. Branża meblarska, branża rolno-spożywcza, transport towarów. Otóż wszędzie tam możemy zwiększyć produktywność, efektywność polskich towarów czy usług.
No właśnie chciałem zapytać, bo mam wrażenie, że pana poprzednicy bardzo lubili patrzeć na innowacyjność przez pryzmat małych, zwinnych startupów, małych firemek. To taka marzenie o wykształceniu polskiej Nokii albo jakiejś firmy, która wyjdzie z garażu, było bardzo obecne. Z drugiej strony, jak ja rozmawiałem z dużymi firmami, to zawsze oni mówili, że zapominane jest, jak dużą siłę i potencjał innowacyjny mają jednak duże przedsiębiorstwa. Czy pan tak o tym też myśli? To znaczy, bo mam takie poczucie też czytając i przygotowując się do tej rozmowy, patrząc na to, co pan mówi o nowej polityce przemysłowej, że jest coraz więcej jednak nacisku na współpracę z tymi dużymi firmami.
Zdecydowanie tak. To jest pewien nowy akcent w działaniach ministerstwa pod moim kierunkiem. Przy czym przez duże, to nie mam na myśli te wielkie spółki Skarbu Państwa. One są troszkę takimi ociężałymi kolosami i w poprzedniej kadencji próbowaliśmy je właśnie unowocześniać, dynamizować, skłonić do zwiększenie nakładów na B+R. No powiem panu tak, że poszło nam średnio. Natomiast prawdziwy, szybki wzrost mogą zapewnić firmy przede wszystkim prywatne. No i właśnie to nie będą startupy. Znaczy, wspaniale, że stworzono w poprzedniej kadencji, również z moim udziałem, wiele instrumentów wspierania, finansowania startupów. Wierzę, że wyłoni się kiedyś z nich Nokia. To może nie jest najlepszy przykład, zważywszy na obecny stan tej firmy, ale jakiś inny czarny łabędź. Natomiast dla mnie kluczowym partnerem są firmy średnie i duże. Tam widzę największy potencjał wzrostu produktywności.
To tutaj bym zaczepił pana o słowo polskie. To znaczy w tym programie wszędzie pojawia się słowo polskie. Rozumiem, że to jest taki zabieg retoryczno-polityczny, który też jest bardzo ważny dla pana obozu politycznego i ogólnie jest trochę związany w sposób oczywisty z krajem, w którym mieszkamy. Natomiast z drugiej strony, jak się patrzy na ten układ polskiego przemysłu, to bardzo wiele z tych firm to są firmy z kapitałem zagranicznym. Jak tutaj pan to widzi? Na ile jest tutaj napięcie i na ile ono powinno być? A na ile jednak powinniśmy jednak szukać tych firm, które funkcjonują w Polsce, rzeczywiście są duże, rzeczywiście są innowacyjne i mogą dać ten impuls innowacyjny całej naszej gospodarce.
No, panie dyrektorze, oczywiście najbardziej bym sobie życzył, żeby rozwijały się takie firmy, które na przykład pan założy i podbije rynki światowe, czyli polskie w 100% od struktury kapitałowej poprzez miejsce, w którym płaci się podatki. Ale takie firmy oczywiście są i należy na nie chuchać i dmuchać przy zachowaniu zasad wynikających z prawa unijnego, które słusznie zabrania różnicować stosunku do firm w zależności od narodowości kapitału. Natomiast gdy ja piszę polskie albo mówię o firmach polskich, to mam na myśli firmy ulokowane w Polsce, działające w Polsce i płacące tutaj podatki. To drugie też podkreślam nie przypadkowo, bo różnie z tym płaceniem podatków bywało. Natomiast mam świadomość, że przez te 30 lat wolnej, niepodległej Polski, bo dla mnie niepodległość się zaczęła w 1989 roku, otóż przez ten czas tym motorem wzrostu, również motorem innowacyjności, zwiększania wydajności pracy, wysokich standardów, były firmy zagraniczne. I oczywiście, znowu, nie wszystkie. Wiemy, że prywatyzacja niezbędna. Jestem gorącym zwolennikiem prywatyzacji. Uważam, że ona powinna być dalej posunięta, ale ta prywatyzacja w latach 90. często służyła po prostu zamknięciu polskich firm po to, żeby one nie konkurowały z firmami należącymi do tego samego właściciela w innych krajach. Natomiast zasadniczo rzecz biorąc, polskie, to znaczy działające na terytorium Polski. I dlatego jako minister odpowiedzialny za gospodarkę ogromny wkładam w to, żeby ściągnąć jak najwięcej inwestycji, ale nie byle jakich, tylko takich, które rzeczywiście stanowią jakąś nową jakość w polskiej gospodarce, które stwarzają najwięcej dobrze płatnych miejsc pracy, bo to jest pewien element, który łączy obóz Zjednoczonej Prawicy. Do tej pory mówiliśmy o pewnych różnicach we wrażliwości gospodarczej. Ja jestem wolnorynkowcem, moi koledzy z PiS-u, czy zwłaszcza Solidarnej Polski, raczej socjaldemokratami. Natomiast tym, co nas łączy, jest przekonanie, że ta ścieżka rozwoju Polski, która polegała na taniej sile roboczej, że to jest droga w ślepy zaułek. My robimy wszystko, żeby ściągać tutaj albo rozwijać rodzimy przemysł, czy rodzimą wytwórczość, rodzimą działalność gospodarczą, taką, która zapewnia wysokie płace.
Tutaj bym chętnie przeszedł do tematu przemysłu 4.0. To był taki bardzo modne hasło parę lat temu. Trochę mam wrażenie, z jednej strony zapomniane, a z drugiej strony to jest coś, co się po prostu dzieje, o czym trochę mniej mówimy, a bardziej to idzie do przodu, przynajmniej w naszej debacie takiej polityczno-gospodarczej. Nie wiem, czy by się pan zgodził. Natomiast chciałem się zapytać, jak to się ma właśnie z tym wytwarzaniem tych wysokopłatnych miejsc pracy tutaj w Polsce i jak to się ma też z tym przyciąganiem inwestycji? To znaczy w jaki sposób, inaczej, w jaki sposób powinniśmy zbudować polski przemysł 4.0 i z kim?
Ze wszystkimi, którzy chcą inwestować w Polsce. Tutaj największy problem jest z inwestycjami polskich przedsiębiorców. Wiemy doskonale, że ta skłonność do inwestowania jest niska i my ludzie obozu rządowego musimy się zastanowić, z czego to wynika. Nie udało nam się pobudzić inwestycji polskich przedsiębiorców. W moim przekonaniu wynika to w największym stopniu z nikłego poziomu zaufania przedsiębiorców do własnego państwa. I to jest bardzo gorzka diagnoza. Dla mnie budowa i odbudowa kapitału zaufania między przedsiębiorcami a instytucjami państwowymi to jest jeden z kluczowych celów. Dlatego wszystkie działania, które podejmuję w ministerstwie, od kolejnych form niesienia pomocy dla branż zamkniętych na skutek obostrzeń sanitarnych, po nową politykę przemysłową, prowadzę w maksymalnie szerokim dialogu ze światem biznesu. Reformy i również te plany takie jak Nowy Ład, czy jak polityka przemysłowa Polski, one się mogą powieść tylko wtedy, kiedy będą powstawać w sposób partycypacyjny. Znaczy wtedy, kiedy będziemy czerpać z mądrości przedsiębiorców. Oni dbają o swoje firmy, oni najlepiej wiedzą, co jest im potrzebne i trzeba tę mądrość jakoś skumulować, zinwentaryzować, usystematyzować i wyciągnąć z niej prawdziwe wnioski. Natomiast z drugiej strony przedsiębiorcy muszą też mieć poczucie, że to państwo gwarantuje im stabilność warunków. Stąd moje nieustanne wysiłki od wielu, wielu lat i to takie wysiłki syzyfowe, żeby ograniczyć nadprodukcję przepisów, żeby te przepisy były jak najjaśniejsze, najprostsze, żeby były niepodatne na arbitralne interpretacje ze strony urzędów państwowych. Mówiąc krótko, jednym z moich podstawowych celów jako ministra odpowiedzialnego za gospodarkę jest otoczyć biznes tym, co nazwałem tarczą prawną. Mamy tarcze finansowe dla branż dotkniętych obostrzeniami, ale dla całego biznesu trzeba zbudować tarczę prawną i to jest coś, czego być może polskiemu biznesowi brakuje bardziej niż zastrzyku finansowego.
A chciałem jeszcze zapytać o współpracę z organizacjami reprezentującymi pracowników, bo dużo Pan mówi o tym dialogu z pracodawcami. No było całe to zamieszanie z Radą Dialogu Społecznego, z jakieś napięcia z Solidarnością, które zdaje się, że mniej więcej udało się wygładzić. Natomiast no, we wszystkim, co Pan mówi, może to też jest kwestia miejsca i tematu rozmowy, ale nie słyszę wiele o pracownikach, czy organizacjach reprezentujących pracowników. Czy tutaj też ten dialog się toczy w kontekście na przykład takich planów, czy myślenia o rozwoju gospodarki?
Bardzo trafne pytanie. Gdy mówię o partycypacji, to mam pełną świadomość, że te działania, które podejmujemy, mogą się powieść nie tylko, to znaczy, żeby się powiodły, to muszą być obliczone na dialog nie tylko z pracodawcami, ale także z pracownikami i ich reprezentacją. Ja jestem przewodniczącym w tym roku Rady Dialogu Społecznego. Ogromny wysiłek wkładam w to, żeby odbudować rangę tej instytucji. Wspomniał Pan o pewnych nieporozumieniach z Solidarnością. Ja je odziedziczyłem. One były wcześniejsze. Udało mi się wyprostować sytuację. Solidarność wróciła do stołu i bardzo dobrze. I w tej chwili intensywnie, tak intensywnie jak tylko pozwala na to ta szczególna pandemiczna rzeczywistość, pracujemy nad znalezieniem jak największej liczby punktów stycznych między poglądami pracodawców i związków zawodowych. Trzeba w te projekty partycypacyjne włączać szeroką reprezentację świata pracy. Stąd pomysł taki bardzo nietypowy, bo tylko raz tak się stało za czasów wicepremiera Hausnera. Stąd pomysł naszego rządu, żeby połączyć obszar gospodarki z obszarem pracy w jednych rękach. No to są te dwie dłonie i moim obowiązkiem jest szukanie efektu synergii między gospodarką a pracą.
Bardzo Panu dziękuję i mam nadzieję, że to się uda.
Dziękuję bardzo, proszę trzymać kciuki.
Dziękuję. Hello Julien, welcome to Risks and Trends. Julien, you've been the CEO of Orange Polska since September. Before that you headed Orange Moldova. Earlier still you worked in marketing, communication strategy and business intelligence in Orange. I wanted to ask you, when you arrived in Poland, this was a short breath between the first and the second wave of the pandemic. And I wanted to ask you, is it possible to learn a new country, a business, an organization looking at a computer screen?
Good morning. Well, I will say it's not so much a question whether it's possible, because I think, like everyone in any job, we had no choice. And certainly, you know, for a CEO, it's very strange, but I will say for all employees, you know, we have been moved online and home. So I will not consider my case as more difficult. I think we all have our sort of challenge, but on a personal level, to reflect on my situation, it's certainly a big challenge, because I would say as a CEO, besides the skills of running a business, you know, which in the case of Poland is pretty much a big business with a very senior leadership team, one of the value added of the CEO is obviously to be able to go between the line across the organization and help to facilitate between the different departments, which, you know, in my case, it's very difficult to go between the line and across the organization, to go on the field. I will say to get direct feedback from, you know, frontliners, field engineer, that usually, you know, as a CEO, you are able to facilitate some, you know, issues that are inside the company. And this is not happening.
Julien, I'm going to move on to sort of more macro themes. Polish economy is in between plans. We're waiting for the Prime Minister to unveil his new Polish order. In the meantime, at the beginning of the year, the Deputy Prime Minister in charge of the economy launched something he called Poland's industrial policy. So I'm going to give you the 5 pillars of that industry, and then I'm going to ask you about 3 of those which I think concern you and Orange Polska. One of these pillars is the digitization of industrial processes. The second is security of critical products. And by this he meant, I think, mainly pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. The third is relocation of production capacities, so that's basically reshoring or bringing back production capacity to Poland. Building on the European Green Deal, and building a new society built on trust, cooperation, and strengthening of social ties. So I propose we're going to, for the sake of our discussion, I'm going to leave out the bits on security of supply and production. And I wanted to ask you about basically digitization, the Green Deal, and this social cohesion. How does Orange write itself into these plans?
Well, we are very, I would say, comfortable and aligned with those directions, because they, I mean, we are going the same way. I think as well, you know, as a major company and certainly telecom provider, you know, we have our duty and we feel our place in this plan to accelerate. And, you know, for me, the main topics are around digital infrastructure, where clearly, you know, we have demonstrated, we have invested around 1.5 to 2 billion every year in the infrastructure, whether it is mobile or whether it is fiber, especially more fiber the last few years. And on the green, I think we have a tremendous role to play as first getting things done, but I think as well as leading in some area this green transformation. And I think what is as well very important and close to me is that we have a responsibility regarding you know, inclusion, digital inclusion. I think that will be one of the major topic in the future. This pandemic has revealed that, you know, it is not a question whether if or not to get connected, but everyone has to be connected. And I think this will be a big challenge, that everyone will be connected and everyone will be educated to behave on digital.
I wanted to ask you about Industry 4.0. I think this is a tag that was very trending, say, 5 years ago. Recently, I haven't heard those words, Industry 4.0, that often. On the other hand, I'm guessing it's happening. How do you perceive this? Do you think we're in the middle of an industrial revolution?
I will not try to comment on whether it is a revolution, evolution, and where we stand on this, because I think it depends the industry, the verticals, and you know, the competitiveness on this market to be more or less digital. What is for sure is that the recent event and the state of, you know, with the pandemic and everything, we saw a huge acceleration of things that were present before the pandemic, but the pandemic has made it, you know, an acceleration, and probably we won 3 or 4 years of time of natural adoption. So we move clearly from early adopter to mass adoption of some of the technology. I think what we can say easily is that we are, at least from our area, in front of another acceleration, which is 5G. 5G is bringing clearly all this notion of private network, all this notion of massive Internet of Things, so we call it IoT, where, you know, every type of machine, sensor is going to be connected. And then you add on top of it all the topic around artificial intelligence and big data. And this combination of connectivity, mass connectivity, when I'm talking about this Internet of Things, coupled with automatization, intelligence artificial, private network will be, I think, the real start of the Industry 4.0, as you call it.
When do you think this will happen? Because from my perspective, and this is probably some 10 years ago, I remember these visions of basically refrigerators talking to ovens and sort of then cars talking to lamp posts. And I think this sort of ridiculed the whole idea. I'm making it sound silly, obviously, but I think this is something that happened. I mean, we were waiting for this moment when everything is going to communicate with everything else, and it sounded basically like the Jetsons, and then it didn't happen. So are we arriving at this point, or is this going to be something completely different, and we sort of overshot with these metaphors and analogies?
Yeah, well, for the oven and the fridge, I think it's not a matter of technology. I think it's a matter of whether it is useful or whether it adds any value. When it comes to the business, we see, and Orange across the footprint, and as well we are going to start in Poland, we have already some use case where, and we don't really need 5G per se. It can be done on 4G, those private network that enable a factory to be much more connected and automatized. Because I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's not so much whether they talk to each other, but it's more whether this connectivity make it kind of autonomous. And I think what we are seeing now is all those automatization, RPA, robot process automatization, is enabling all industry to be more efficient, and as well, I think, you know, giving more opportunity for human to do things more interesting instead of repeating tasks.
Do you think orange is the new green? How important a role do you have to play in this revolution, in this climate revolution? I know that theoretically you're not on the front line. On the other hand, I understand you'd like to be, or you believe you need to be on the front line. So what can you actually do for the fight against climate change, for basically lowering emissions?
Yeah, to put a bit of perspective, as we are very involved in this topic, setting our strategy for the future. So if we look in Poland, the ICT sector, which is, you know, roughly all mobile fixed operator, we are around 1.4% of the carbon emission in the country. It's not, I will say, we are not the major one, but we are not as well the smallest one. That's why for us it's very important. As well, there is, you know, that the data traffic is increasing non-stop. Obviously, the current situation today led to a massive increase of the fixed and the fiber. And for us, if we've simplified a lot, our main emission of carbon is coming from electricity, which is the fuel of the network, let's say. We have to make sure that while the traffic is increasing from the customer demand, and it will continue because, you know, video is getting higher quality, more bandwidth, people are spending more online, and more people go on fiber, which is all driver of more traffic. So we have to make sure that we are more efficient, our network are more intelligent, our network, you know, switch off them when there is no traffic. All of this is we are working on, and that's why we have this objective to be carbon neutral by 2040, which is, you know, some can say it's far away and might just be marketing. The reality is that if I look today, we are already at minus 16% consumption versus 2015, which is where we want and measure us against. So we will be carbon neutral by 2040 versus where we started. Now, so electricity, it's a major one, but obviously we can do something, but not completely. So we can diversify the source of electricity to have more green. That's what we started last year. We bought some package that will cover around 10% of our usage, and we plan to increase this. But we are a bit depending as well of the electricity producer to become more green. And you know the topic in Poland, it's not an easy one when it comes to electricity production. Then if I look at what we are doing, we have what we have inside that we have to take care, which is again mainly electricity. But it is as well what we put on the market. And here I'm looking at a handset. It is a big source of pollution. Europe did a calculation with some NGO in the green that if we will be able, or if the customer will extend by 1 year the usage of their phone, which, you know, it's around 2.5, 3 years. Probably for Apple it's quicker because people change faster. But if we will extend by 1 year, we will save the equivalent of removing 2 million cars in Europe from the road. So it's a massive thing. So we need to work with a customer. We need to do more recycle. You've probably seen that we have launched last week our latest set-top box with Wi-Fi 6, and we are very happy that it's made out of 100% recycled plastic. We have stopped mostly to send invoice to the customer. 80% of our customers receive electronic invoice. This is the equivalent of 20,000 trees that we are saving every year with this. So there is all those things that we have to, and our third direction is helping the business, our partners, authorities, all our partners in the public or private domain. And for you know, an example is smart cities. Orange is the biggest provider of electrical bike management in Poland. We are managing the main electrical bike fleet in the country. There is a lot of initiative around smart lighting. You can save a lot of electricity in a city if you have a smart lighting system, meaning that the light go on when it's needed, according the daylight and so on.
The fifth pillar of Govin's plan is, I think he calls it a new society. And basically, from what I understand, it's about providing a digital skill set, which basically will allow for people to function in a more digital reality. I wanted to ask you how this looks from your perspective, because I remember times when basically digital companies and telecoms operators were the beginning of something new, that at a moment there was this, we went back a moment, and I think people started saying that maybe screen time is the enemy of, I don't know, family time or friend time, that, you know, young people are sitting in their telephones all the time and not talking to each other, but basically texting or doing whatever young people do these days on their telephones. And you became the boogeyman of the digital economy. Now I think, again, we've moved in a different direction, and GAFA and basically, you know, big tech companies and especially social media powerhouses are in the crosshairs. How do you perceive this? I mean, do you believe that you're becoming a utility, basically? You're becoming like somebody who provides water or electricity who you don't really think about or remember about? Or are you still somewhere up there amongst the good and the bad actors of the digital revolution?
Yeah, well, obviously we are not seeing ourselves as a utility due to the fact that, you know, our portfolio and the way we approach our customer is going beyond connectivity, and there is, especially on B2B, the need of you know, integration, intelligent solution. As we discussed before, the network are becoming intelligent, they are becoming cloud, they are becoming... So, no, definitely we are not a provider of A to B of digital services, but we are enabling those ecosystems and helping the customer to connect to it. Now, it's true that there is, and this is what we are trying to address with our foundation, that we have a great responsibility to, for me, they are twofold. One, we discussed one, which is about inclusion. No one should be left behind when it comes to connectivity. So we have a role to help together with authorities and NGO to address this issue, whether it is rural, and we are doing that together with authorities. You know, we have those POPC programs that we are addressing fiber in less, I mean, in a low penetrated area. And we have as well to help the people who have financial difficulties and cannot necessarily access to internet, because there is no doubt that in the future, you know, if there is a big risk that there will be a scarcity with the two-speed, those who have access to fast internet and those who don't have access to fast internet. So we have to make sure that, you know, commercially, but as well with our foundation and CSR strategy, we address those. And then there is a topic of education that, you know, you talk about time screen for the kids, all those discussion that we have, you know, as a parents, that big question around whether it's too much, not enough time in front of the screen. And I think here this is a scarcity issue that Orange is part of the conversation, dialogue with authorities, with different NGO that we are working with, whether it is doctor, psychologist. And I think, you know, to be honest, I think no one has a clear answer on this, and we need to work together with the different partners and deal with it. But we assume our responsibility and we take part of this conversation.
I was just wondering, listening to you, how we've started talking about energy poverty recently, and I don't know if this is already part of the conversation, but I'm thinking about what you were saying about digital poverty. I don't know if this is a term that's been coined already, but I think it makes sense maybe for big digital companies to start looking at this, because digital poverty might be another barrier of inclusion in society in the future. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hello Jesper, welcome to Risks and Trends. You've been the CEO of Ingka Group for almost 3.5 years, and you've been with the IKEA Group for over 20 years. And looking back at your career in IKEA and Ingka Group. I was wondering if you've ever experienced anything like the COVID-19 pandemic in your managerial career.
No, I think it's easy to say that I have not met anybody who would answer anything different than no to that question. We are experiencing unprecedented times. The only reference points, even if that was, of course, more dramatic, is when people refer back to war times or conflicts like that. I've experienced a crisis before, and luckily, because you can learn a lot from leading in crisis. But the way the pandemic has changed everything for us and how it's influenced each and one of us and all of our customers at the same time is absolutely unprecedented.
Many people talk about new business models, new models of leadership that have evolved because of this managing by change and through different and difficult times. Have you noticed this? I mean, has this in a way impacted your business model? Has it speeded up processes, or are you pretty much on the same track but in a different reality?
I would say somebody said it's difficult to judge history when you're in the middle of it, and that's I think one of the sentiments we all have right now. So with a portion of humbleness, I would still say the main element as it looks for us right now is not a new business model, but speeding up everything. So if you look at the pure numbers of IKEA, we in March, we went from basically at that moment when Corona hit us, we were running approximately 10% of our business was online, if you like. So 90% was cash and carry. So with the closures, we had close to 80% of our stores closed for many weeks. And thereby you can say we would have, in an ordinary situation, we would have been in red numbers and in a really bad place from an economic perspective. But we were capable to switch to online. We were capable to use our stores as fulfillment centers, which was a strategy we had, but this speeded up that strategy with several years, I would say. And in a way, we managed to take back approximately 60-70% of our business. What we a little bit underestimated was, as we opened up IKEA again, there was a pent-up demand that was much bigger than we thought. So in the first and the second wave, when we've seen opening ups, we have had huge challenges to actually be able to acquire and get goods to our stores in time. So overall, I think the retail transformation, online, offline, omnichannel, interesting enough, the pandemic has helped us gain many years in development.
What are the biggest problems? Because you talk about your successes, but could you also address the challenges? What were the things that came difficult, that were a problem, that maybe didn't work the way they should have? I'm thinking, I don't know, supply chains, subcontractors, maybe HR issues.
Absolutely. I would say to start with two areas predominantly. One was people. I was personally, I was sleepless a couple of nights on not knowing if we would be able to save jobs, be able to keep IKEA and Ingka afloat. Secondly, I would say, which is still going to plague all businesses, I think, for at least a year to come, and that is the imbalances in the supply chains. So we have massive challenges. I would say at this moment, it remains one of our biggest headaches, to say the congestions in ports, containers in the wrong places, boats being delayed, and the whole global distribution network is, of course, in a situation we could never experience or could never imagine in our lives. And in spite of that, I think we have managed to turn things around, be creative, and as such, we're actually catching up with some of the availability challenges that we've had. But it's difficult, it's challenging.
Everybody I've spoken to in Poland in retail keeps talking about flexibility, agility. I think you also mentioned flexibility, agility. And I understand that. I understand that you need to adapt to a changing reality. But looking at this from the perspective of long-term perspective of an organization, of the people who work in the organization, I think that, I guess that managing in permanent, rapid change must be very tiring and is difficult for an organization. I wonder how this has impacted your corporate culture. Is this something that you've discussed? And has this been a problem? Or on the other hand, do you just think that that's the way it has to be and we just all have to be on our toes, agile and ready to keep changing everything all the time? Is that healthy?
Well, if I start with, of course, it's challenging, and I think at the moment, I would say we're probably the same as everybody else. The longevity of this crisis, the marathon of it, and maybe also a lot of people were hoping for that the light in the tunnel would come sooner. So I think to hang in there and have stamina is something that I definitely recognize among my leaders. We have to work on providing much more opportunities for dialogue, to open up and be vulnerable and to share where you are and not hide emotions here, because it's difficult for many people. Some people it's difficult to run the ever-changing conditions of the operations. For others, it's the isolation that is a challenge, and for some it's both. But I would say, on the other hand, I think there is an opportunity here also from a leadership. We are not the same as before. We are much more flexible and agile today. We have, in a way, we have learned things that we didn't know before. We have dropped a lot of the red tape. We are so much less bureaucratic. I think also in every market, more or less, the relations with governments, where we come together with governments, unions, and said, okay, let's drop some of the topics we had before and establish new links to actually resolve this for the common good. This I find absolutely refreshing. And one of the learnings we can maybe add here is IKEA since long has been, with all the goods and bads, but we have been a very strong company culture with values gearing us. And what I found interesting during this crisis was that we acted very fast, almost everywhere at the same time. And I got questions from journalists early on how we could be so fast in directing and steering. But the truth was, to a certain extent, we didn't. People knew that they had a mandate to take decisions and do the right thing, and that was expected of them. So thereby, I think we were quite fast in actually mobilizing IKEA in the beginning. That I find interesting.
And now I'd like to move on to the other challenge of our times, climate change. I don't want to compare the two for a number of reasons, but I think there are certain areas in which there is an overlap. And I'm wondering if you think that today, looking at the challenges posed by the fight against climate change and possibly the effects of climate change, we're a bit wiser in 2021 than we were at the beginning of 2020? Or, I mean, are these two completely different parallel universes?
To a certain extent, I think that there are reasons to be both more pessimistic and optimistic at this moment. But I would definitely say that the pandemic is helping us when it comes to the even bigger challenge, which is climate change. So with all the respect of the pandemic and the longevity of it, the aspects of climate change and the risks for humanity here is basically existential, and at a level that even the pandemic cannot match. So I would say, at this moment, I would say if you want to look at it with a bit pessimistic view, what we know now compared to 1 year or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years ago, the challenges look even bigger. The risks of us actually not only missing the 1.5 target, but even hitting much higher temperatures in our lifetime is unfortunately one of the scenarios. So, and to that, you have economic rebuild, you have, of course, the political topics, you have the development in developing countries. There are many factors here that would point in the wrong direction. But on the other hand, on the optimistic side, I see a lot of signs to be optimistic. To start with, the debate has moved the last year, I would say, from the last years from debating if this is a problem. There are a couple of few people, leaders out there who deny climate change or don't want to realize the facts. But I don't think that's where the debate is going to be at all. So the debate is moving from, is this a fact? Why is it important to actually, what do we do about it and how can we act on it? And this is refreshing. I'm part of the World Economic Forum Climate Alliance, and I'm part of new collaborations where competitors, where value chain partners, and where governments and companies are meeting up to actually discuss solutions. We are still, I would say, far from being able to have a plan for the world with all the actions that needs to be in place. But the discussions are about that and about the right topics, and that brings me a lot of optimism.
And what does this mean for IKEA as a business?
I would say the last 12 months we have actually speeding up all our knowledge, but also our initiatives and investments. So we have put some of the investments earlier. We have added to the basket of actions. Now, I would say what this means for IKEA is, I would say sustainability is what's going to make IKEA successful in the future. And this is a very important aspect that I'm very happy to share with all companies out there, because sustainability is not a pain or an issue. It's actually the new way that we invest in and create the new low cost of tomorrow. It is about energy smart. It's about resource smart. And of course, if you know IKEA, we're all about trying to bring down costs and be affordable for the many people. So rightly executed, sustainability is the way we build economy 2.0, basically. There are hurdles and barriers. There are investment barriers. There are decisions that needs to be taken together with the governments around the world, including Poland, on how do we incentivize the new economy? How do we make sure the early investors in the new economy are enticed to actually take the decisions earlier rather than later? But when it comes to the three big infrastructure shifts, energy, I'm very optimistic. Everything points out that the renewable energy equations, unsubsidized, is the right, and we have the solutions, and they are happening as we speak. Mobility, the same. It's not as far, but it's coming. When it comes to the part we represent, consumption, we are, I think, only in the beginning, but we have started to see signs of actually constructing a business model for sustainable consumption, where we build our offer on recyclability, renewable materials, electrical and renewable energy throughout the value chains. So IKEA's plan is very sincere. It's leading us up to 2030, where we are aiming to be climate positive by many different actions on the things that really has an impact.
I wanted to ask you about the trends, and probably this writes itself into what you were just saying, but about the trends of that will shape our tomorrow. Many people talk about deconsumption. I guess you also tend to talk about deconsumption. I have to say that, however, deconsumption sounds like a great idea, it doesn't ring very honest in the words, in the mouths of business leaders, because at the end of the day, you have shareholders, you have profits. How do you match that from, on the one hand, from the perspective of IKEA and your shareholders, and on the other hand, from the perspective of the rebuilding of the global economy? How can we progress consuming less?
Thank you. And thank you for bringing this topic up. I think it's one of the most important topics for us to discuss now. Personally, I don't use the word deconsumption. I think there is, as always, if we jump to the solution before we have analyzed the problem and agreed on the problem, I think we might choose the wrong one. I hear voices saying that we should stop consuming. I don't see that happening. I hear a lot of voices talking about the premium for sustainability and what we need to be able to cost. I think that's at least politically naive and could lead us into a disaster. If you look at the political movements around the world, where do you see where we ignore the big groups of people? Where is that going to work? There is no such evidence. And to be honest, I don't see the need for it also. I can talk about the challenges and the unsolved parts of the puzzle, but I think it's important to also start in the other end. IKEA in Poland and IKEA Global has invested in renewable energy. Today, it's a great business for us. It was a decision for us to match other investments, but today it was a good investment decision. So we have now more wind and solar than we need for our own operations. That's one example. It's not small. It's a trendsetter for the future. We are 2025, we're going to be 100% electrical vehicle in all our home deliveries. There are some real challenges because different cities and countries are on different places with this. But already in Shanghai, we are 100% implemented. Amsterdam, New York, Los Angeles, many more cities are on the way. Copenhagen, Oslo, etc. This is not, I would say, a sacrifice or a premium, but the new way of doing it. If you take the city of Paris recently announced that it will be difficult to get into the city if you don't use electrical. And if I continue down that road, it's not about deconsumption. It is about respecting that also in the future, the many people, even more people, would like to have a beautiful home and a functional home. And they will have thin wallets. So the question is, how do we provide that? Overconsumption and stupid consumption should be rooted out, of course. But how do we provide solutions for prolonging product life length, for making it easier for people to work with secondhand, to buy back, and then all the way to bringing back materials that we are investing now, taking back mattresses, other types of materials, and making new products. And I'm absolutely convinced that we are about to crack a consumption model which is then climate neutral or positive. And this is what we need to talk about. The other two, I think the arrogant capitalistic old school will not work, and the de-consumption will probably not work also. So we go for the middle road.
Before we move on to the final part, to Poland, I wanted to ask about the other trends that have come up during the pandemic, that have speeded up during the pandemic, and that might impact your business, which I find personally interesting. One of them is de-urbanization. I don't know if you're seeing that. I know we're seeing that in Poland, where many people have started moving out of cities, or at least living part of their lives outside of cities, and probably they won't come back. So some people are saying that the 21st century is going to be the century of the countryside, as the 20th century was the century of the city. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but if you would, how would that impact you? And the other thing that's probably sort of closer to our hearts today is de-officization, if I may coin a phrase that doesn't, I think, exist. Basically, the fact that we're going to be working more from home, which is also probably inevitable. So these two, and maybe others, if you have any up your sleeve.
I haven't heard that word before, but I think it's the right word, actually. So, well, it's interesting. I would say this is how I think we should do it together. I think we should recognize the trends, but then stay very humble for how they will play as variables. You have the pandemic, of course, in the short and midterm, and possibly in the long run, that we need to take out for. We've spoken about climate crisis, which is a variable in all the demands, supply chains, legislation, financials, and all sorts of human calamities that could happen. If I would say in our business, you can say the whole shift and the focus on life at home, which is interesting enough. It has never happened on a global scale before. Now the pandemic has put a totally different attention to life at home. That's an important trend for us. You raise the uncertainties and maybe the futurism of supply chains. So that's definitely one of the variables. And then you can say, it's difficult, I think, at this moment to say which trend is a real trend when it comes to urbanization and such. I'm convinced that we will learn how to work in smarter ways. When it comes to the conclusion at this moment, it's clear that people will also post the pandemic be smart about why we travel and why we use physical meetings. But I also see that, as somebody said, a virtual hug is nice, but it doesn't replace a real hug. And I think the understanding of what physical will mean will also prevail. When it comes to urbanization or not, from a climate perspective, urbanization is a good idea. It's easier for us to resolve some of the big challenges in big cities. So that would speak for that. And all other trends before the pandemic would probably speak for that. The de-urbanization might be temporary. But who knows? My point would be to say, identify the variables and then be very good at scenario planning. Don't believe in just one scenario, but play with the variables and understand how your company, your business, your organization will be impacted if different things happen. This is, I think, the agility model that we are all learning right now.
Okay, so moving on to Poland and using the scenarios you talk about, I understand that yesterday was, or a couple of days ago, was your 60th birthday in Poland, so happy birthday. I wanted to ask you what Poland means for IKEA today, and what scenarios are you planning for the Polish presence in the group? Do you think that Poland is still going to be as important an element of your global business, or do you think that, as I asked at the beginning, it's going to be rather spread out and you're going to be sort of defragmenting production and also operations throughout the other countries that you operate in, and maybe spreading wider, and how this would impact Poland?
I think to start with, looking back, IKEA Poland is a love story, and I think IKEA wouldn't exist without Poland. I don't know if people might not know the story, but way back when our founder started the company, I think the first real challenge he met was being actually boycotted by producers in Sweden. This is way back. And through some different coincidences, there was a contact established with people in Poland. And Ingvar Kamprad and his first entrepreneurs and the leaders in Poland established a link and actually, in a very entrepreneurial way, set up a collaboration that made actually IKEA survive, I think, in the first real crisis. So ever since, I think, those days, there's been a gratitude and an inspiration from our founder and IKEA to be very close to Poland. Poland is one of the few places in IKEA where we have everything. We have production, we have distribution, we have stores. We experiment with everything in the new omnichannel models. We have windmills. We are approximately 15,000 co-workers, so it's a big group of people. Indirectly, we need to add at least another 75,000 people, I think. So we are up towards 100,000 people that are engaged every day, earning their money on the IKEA model. But moreover, I would say there is something that resonates, I think, with IKEA culture and Polish culture. When there are challenges, you don't bow. You stand strong in the wind and you accept challenges. And I would say from an entrepreneurial point of view, I've seen incredible creativity and speed in solutions in Poland that has been so important for IKEA. So I think when we look at the future, who knows these days? But we are celebrating the first 60 years, and we are very hopeful for another 60 years at least with IKEA in Poland.
Well, happy birthday again, and thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for your time, Jesper.
Thank you so much.
Bardzo dziękuję Państwu za te 60 minut spędzone z nami. Zapraszam już za 4 godziny na kolejne rozmowy. O 15:00 Hanna Cichy będzie rozmawiała ze swoimi gośćmi na temat przyszłości rynku pracy i o tym, jaki wpływ będzie on miał na system edukacji w Polsce. Tymczasem chciałem podziękować naszym partnerom. Partnerowi głównemu Orange Polska, a także firmom E.ON, edis Energia, IKEA Polska, Microsoft i Visa. Partnerami wspierającymi, którzy pomogli nam zorganizować tegoroczną konferencję, jest ECFR oraz GMF US. A partnerem medialnym jest radio TOK FM.